Welcome to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm Kathy, and this season is dedicated to exploring the unique world of raising boys. Parenting boys today can feel like trying to crack a complicated code, a mystery, especially when it comes to understanding their inner emotional world. Together, we'll dive into real life stories, share practical tips, and uncover insights to help you and your son thrive, not just survive. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's unlock the parenting code, one boy at a time. Today's episode is an absolute treat for parents navigating the teenage years, especially if you're curious about alternative education, mental health tools, or building trust and partnership with your son. My guest is Lainie Liberti, a trailblazer in teen mentorship, a best-selling author, and the founder of Transformative Mentoring for Teens. Lainie has lived an extraordinary life so far, traveling around the world nomadically with her son, Miro, starting when he was just 9 years old. She's an advocate for conscious parenting, world schooling, and self-directed learning, and her work has empowered countless teens and families around the globe. Lainie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation. It is such a pleasure to be here with you and the work that you do.
Well, thank you. It's interesting that you are coming from Mexico, correct? And
Yeah.
I am sitting here in Japan. So it's kind of what a beautiful world we're in where we can have this kind of a conversation. And it's a beautiful world we're in. So, Lainey, really, your life has been nothing short of incredible from my perspective and from many others. From raising your son on the road for over 15 years as a single mom to writing a best-selling book, seen, heard, and understood. I know that our listeners are eager to learn about what inspired you to raise your son nomadically and educate him through the world. Can you start by sharing what your life looked like until your son was 9? And then what was it that motivated you to take such a bold leap into nomadic life and world schooling with your son?
It's really funny. My life sounds epic through your eyes, but for me, it was just one step, one thing, the next thing. And for me, I was just following my internal guidance. Back in 2008, which is when this story began, I was living in Los Angeles. I had worked in marketing, graphic design, branding for about 18 years. In the last 8 of those years, I was running my own agency and it was quite successful in Los Angeles. It was a small boutique agency. But what that meant was I was working a lot. And as a single parent who chose to be a single parent and really was excited my entire childhood to be a parent. Like that was my dream. I knew I always wanted to be a mom. But I also knew on the flip side that I had to support my family and being a strong, independent woman and all those things that I identified as had costs and consequences. And what I didn't know back then were the costs and consequences that really took a toll on my relationship with my then 9-year-old child. He said to me all the time, Mom, you're always working. You never spend any time with me. And that just broke my heart into a million pieces. And that really was the inspiration for everything that came afterwards. So, for those of you that are familiar, in 2008, the economy crashed in California. I was stressed, overworked. And on the flip side, I was dealing with this, how do I reconcile being a parent and being a good parent and, providing for my family? And when I had the opportunity to shut down my business, I looked at that as a new path, a new possibility. And I remember being inspired one night. I hadn't planned this, and I was as surprised when the words came out of my mouth, as my son was, because I didn't plan it. I said to him, his name's Miro. I said, Miro, what do you think if we just like got rid of all of this stuff and had an adventure? And he's like, really? It was like 9 o'clock at night.
Hmm.
He, my dog just jumped onto
Beautiful.
the, he looked at me, he stopped his video game and was very surprised and said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go do it." And he said yes, and that was that. And there were lots of sort of things that we had to figure out, plans and shutting down the business and getting rid of our possessions and finding a home for our then dog and all this stuff. But it just sort of came together. And the inspiration really was to reconnect as a family. Our family's small, two people, mom and son, but that was the entirety of our family, and it was very, very important to reconnect. And as somebody who always questioned everything, I questioned the way things were done. I questioned, how people choose to live their lives, and I question authority a lot. I still
Hmm.
do in my 50s. I will never, give that part of myself up. I questioned how we should be parenting. Conscious parenting is great, but I took that to another extreme. I took that to uh, uh, practice as in conscious parenting through partnership. And to me, that felt better because if I chose to be the authority of my child, if I was his boss, then I had to make the rules. I had to then, determine when he was breaking the rules. I had to enforce the rules. And when they were broken, I had to punish. And those were roles that I didn't want to take. And I wanted to model healthy partnerships because I always questioned authority. He needed to be able to question authority. And so for me, connecting and taking this side by side journey felt a lot different than I'm going to drag you by your hair around the world because I think this is good for us.
Yeah.
So there's a very, very big distinction between those two things. And then the second part of your question was really about the education. And at the time, we, were going to travel for 1 year. And intuitively, I knew that 1 year of travel had nothing on what he could get from fifth grade, a traditional fifth grade in the United States. So I said, let's just go have an adventure. This is going to be our learning experience. There was no big intention behind it other than to in partnership, side by side, explore, have an adventure, and learn everything we could together and laugh a lot and connect and say yes and do all the things that I really wanted our relationship to be. And that's what we did. The only difference is it lasted more than 1 year. It still hasn't ended. My son is now, he's going to be turning 26. And we both live in Mexico now, and have started a business together here. We have several businesses together. But the point is, because we have a very lovely connected relationship, he never felt like he had to, go leave and do something else. He's got a very individuated life. He lives on his own. He's got a beautiful partner, girlfriend, but he still chooses to come together. And now we own a cafe in Mexico. So it's like,
Wow.
how lovely, how
Yeah.
lovely. So,
That's
yeah.
beautiful. That's beautiful. Um, okay, so I can see how it started and all of that. You know, or maybe you don't know, but a lot of the things that I do and the work experience that I've had has been with younger children, um, basically like from toddlers through to maybe second grade and further on. But that's my main area. And my learning has been centered around boys and boys in that time period and the different things that can have an effect on them and their self-esteem and just how they see themselves in the world. And those things often happen in North America anyway. Those things often happen early. They start to have, just expectations put on them unrealistically for what it means to be a boy and how to move in society and all that kind of stuff. And then usually around 8 years old, there's often that can be a turning point for some boys where there's been suggestion that it's differences in the hormones, differences in testosterone at that particular point, and often little boys in that stage will become very sensitive, and there are just a lot of things that go with being a boy in North America. So
Yeah.
when your son was in the normal school system in an environment that he was growing up in, did you notice any of those things? Like, was any of that a motivation to not stay in the system, in that society, and to, or was it just that's the way it was?
Well, it's interesting. I never looked back and reflected through the lens of my child's gender. And I suppose what I find interesting from our particular story is that we lived in downtown LA. We lived in an artist area. There were like 350 lofts in this one area. Our life wasn't conventional to start off with. Remember, this is a child being raised by a single parent. And when I started to look at educating my child, the first thing I put him in was a Montessori system. And it was pretty, across the board, it was pretty equalizing. You know, there
Yeah.
wasn't a whole lot of differences. But when he aged out of that, he spent 2 years in a public school where we lived in downtown LA. And it was primarily Hispanic. And we had people from El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, all these different places. But now being a white child
Hmm.
in a very Latin area, I started really drastically to see the differences. Our situation, obviously, I am a woman,
Hmm.
so I communicate very well, and communication was one of the cornerstones of our connection throughout his entire childhood and even through his adulthood. And I hear him communicate with his partners now in a very respectful, authentic, honest, internal knowing,
Hmm.
sense because that's how he was raised. But it wasn't like that in the school for the 2 years that he was in the public school. It was very machismo. It was very different. He did not fit in. And I just chalk that up to cultural differences where,
Hmm.
different in
Okay.
that perspective. I don't know if it was a conscious, gender thing. I just don't know. And I do know as you live in Japan, I live in now, believe it or not, Mexico, which is, very representative of where I came from in Los Angeles. We are third culture, families, and
Yeah.
our kids are third culture kids. And so my child, and I assume yours too, was raised outside of their birth home. And that also creates a lot of internal processing that
Hmm.
each individual has to do because they can't rely on their culture because they're different
Yeah.
to create their identity. And it's a little more stressful, and whether or not it's gender related or nationalistic related or it's value related, who knows? World views are different. So I think my son was able to experience that early on and notice the differences, which allowed him to really notice the similarities later on. Like that became really valuable to him.
One of the things, like in what's referred to as the boy code, is that boys are not, um, they're not emotionally intelligent, and they don't share their emotions, and they don't, communicate and all of that. But I also raised our son differently, and between your son and my son, there's at least two boys that are proof that that's not true, that the
Yeah.
environment that they're raised in and the it's like if you talk to somebody and listen and know how to listen and how to talk, communication will happen, but it's a mutual, respectful thing. But I think too many boys do get peg-hold, and so they tend not to share those things. But it's not that it's not there. So and same thing being for our son as well. Well, there were only two big moves, but whenever we would be move into a new culture, it was a unique, beautiful opportunity to kind of reestablish what was important in the priorities of yourself as an individual and as a family unit. Like what did we want to bring with us? What did we want to leave behind? And so, yes, a different kind of way of growing up. But now you've really extended things a lot more than we had. What were your biggest challenges as a single mom? Like, I mean, there's all kinds of interpretations about single women traveling and the dangers that, can be involved with that. So, what was it like? Like, what challenges did you find that you had as a single mom with a boy traveling the world?
Well, it's interesting. Again, it's the lenses that we look, through in order to give meaning to our experiences. I traveled when I was in my 20s. I hitchhiked all over Europe.
Mm.
So I felt good being, independent. You mentioned early on, I wrote a book. I write about mental health, and I examine my experience through the lens of adolescent development. Because for me, what I discovered, and we could get to that in a minute, but what I discovered was my development was halted at the adolescent stage because of the abuse that I experienced and all this stuff. But that allowed me to really recognize how I was seeing the world, the filters I was seeing the world. And I keep talking about being a strong, independent woman, but I will mention as a caveat that's a trauma response, and that was my trauma response. So I'm not advocating that people need to be like
Yeah,
me. I am saying this is the manner in which I functioned because it was my way of coping with the world. So,
yeah,
as a strong, independent woman who had that as a trauma response, it gave me a sense of independence and security that perhaps maybe other people that are more rational, may not have. But on the other hand, we started to travel through Latin America. And even though many people from the United States and other Western cultures view, especially the United States, view Latin America as a scary place filled with brown people that do crimes. And those were the messages that I grew up with that I rejected. Those
hmm,
were the messages that I chose not to step into fear. And what I found when I got to Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and into South America, which we ended up making our base for 3 years, was that these people were lovely, rich with family. Family is at the foundation of their cultural value. And all we found were families and people that wanted to connect and children that wanted to connect with my child and welcome and open arms. That's what we found.
yeah,
It wasn't those people, it was us as people. And that really became a way for me to exhale a little.
yeah,
Um, we talked a lot, my son and I talked a lot about our core values as we left, and you mentioned that values as a family and values as individuals. Those were the tools that we used to make decisions on our journey. Those were the tools that we used to keep us safe. What were the things that we valued? And we created our list of core values as a family. And then we had our individual lists of core values. And instead of following rules, we checked in to see if the options and choices were in alignment.
yeah.
And when you find that opportunities are in alignment, you truly feel safe.
It's funny that there's a lot of similarities in what you're talking about, and I felt very much the same thing when we moved from Japan. Um, safe, organized to the limit, very
Yeah.
safe. And we moved to Lebanon and we
Oh,
went there for middle school and high school for our son. And the impression is that was after 9/11. So it was all, they're all terrorists. It's just, and it was the same thing. That certainly didn't stop me from making any decisions, and I based decisions on intuition and on the people that I connected with.
yeah.
And again, as a family sitting down, pros and cons, what do you think? But having that experience, and that's what I find sometimes with international education, and like you've got the world in education, so there are some similarities there too that you don't think of things so much in a stereotypical way because none of you are the same. None of the situations are the same. And often the gift you're given is understanding people's preconceived ideas. Like that, we found the same thing. Lebanon has become a second home. My son feels like he's part Canadian, part Japanese, part Lebanese, and could not have had even with the trouble that happened while we were there. It was one of the best experiences that we've ever, dealt with. And the same thing, sitting down in the beginning and, really, really, really deeply talking about what's important. We don't have to follow any rules. Like there's no limitations. It's up to us how we want our life to feel and what's important to us. So yeah, quite a few similarities that I find
A
is
lot.
interesting. I
Yeah.
I would really like to hear about how you got into the teen part of it. And like, was
Oh.
there anything that was, like your pivotal moment, that turned this into a passion? Or, like sometimes that's like mine is a story from 3 years old, when my son was 3 years old. And that incident is what started, 3 decades of trying to understand boys better. So your thing, your passion is all connected with teens. So how
Yeah.
did that come about, and is there a story behind it?
Well, the first sort of deep dive into learning about adolescence was we were maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years into our journey. And we had decided to stay a while in Peru. We made Cusco our home for 3 years. We loved it there, living high in the Andes. And I was writing a lot about world schooling in our journey, and people were reading it crazy enough. And I was invited, Miro and I were invited to go fly back to the States and speak at a conference. And we did. We flew to the East Coast and we spoke at an unschooling conference. And there were dozens and dozens and dozens of kids Miro's age, and they were running around and they were free and wild learners. And wow, did he light up? I mean, he didn't know what he was
Yeah.
missing in terms of community until this particular conference. And we came back to Peru and he was really depressed. And he said, look, Mom, I don't want to live in the States. I don't want to go back, but I also want peers. I want friends. And I said, okay, well, let's put our heads together and figure out what we can do in order to get your needs met. And your needs are in this moment are very sort of like you want this, but you don't want that. So
Yeah.
they're kind of in conflict. So we put our heads together and we decided that, okay, well, his community were really free thinking, free learners or self-directed learners or homeschoolers. Why don't we bring them to where we love for an immersive learning retreat. And that's what dove me, inspired me to dive into learning everything I could about adolescent development. I needed to learn how to facilitate teens. I needed to learn about learning communities. I needed to learn about conflict resolution. I needed to learn about holding space. I needed to learn about mental health. And all of these things were imperative. I had to know these things before I hosted them. I had to be prepared. So I took this deep dive, into learning. And as I started to learn more about the adolescent development, neurobiological development, and hormonal development, I started to remember the tools that I used when I was dealing with my own sort of self-healing and trying to, because when I was pregnant, I really intentionally dove into um, attachment theory, and
Hmm.
how to reprogram your attachment style, because I had a really bad attachment style, as I recognized in the history of my relationships, and I really wanted to be healthy. That
Yeah.
was the gift that I wanted to give my child. So I went through all of that, used a lot of tools, and then I recognized that these tools that I was using would also be a wonderful way to facilitate teens, and that created all these new conversations. And I got even deeper into using myself as sort of the guinea pig,
Yeah.
but I should say that in Peru. But the guinea pig to understand these tools, and I was able to really re-wake up that inner teen inside of me. And as we started to invite teens and, host our first retreat. We had 6 teenagers, and we've had retreats over the past 12 or 13 years with up to 20 teenagers. So, the
Wow.
the amount of teens that we've had in these immersive learning retreats have varied depending on the event. But I was able to create this structure where I can hold space and really see, hear, and understand what teens were going through, and recognizing a lot of the teens that were coming to our international trips were leaving home for the first time, for this
Mm.
limited period, and felt very much outside of their comfort zone. And they needed a way to process all of those feelings and fears, and they needed to feel safe, and they needed to be able to know where the boundaries were, how to push and pull through this experience and support others. They also needed to learn, a lot of them, how to speak their truth, and that became a really incredible exercise. So I always say, so my son and I formed Project World School. I'm bouncing around a little bit. But the solution that we came up with was to form this company. So over the last 13 years, Project World School has been the company where we've hosted over 200 teens in, all these international places, from South Africa to Japan to Thailand to Peru to Ecuador to Mexico to
Mm.
Wales,
Well,
all
that's
over the
beautiful.
so yeah, it's been a lot of fun, but the tools and the internal world exploration really was the foundation, because I had to have a handle
Yeah.
on that in order to facilitate the outer world experiences.
Did you notice any difference between the needs of teen boys and teen girls?
Yeah, very much so. Um, Teen boys at first are not very comfortable. We always do a nightly circle on our retreats, and they were in general not very comfortable talking about, we start off with the question, what worked today, what didn't work today, and then we go into a deeper question based on a card that we created, and they get to pull a card every night, and they're usually an internal world question where it's about reflection and sharing. And the teen boys, generally in a group, tend to be more sort of skittish, or, they would use humor
Yeah.
to mask their discomfort.
Yeah.
And I would say about 20% of the teen boys never break through that and actually don't share. They're there in the circle, so they get to experience the
Yeah.
share of others. But about 20% are still very, very resistant. And I don't find that in the girls.
Have you
Um,
ever had excuse me for interrupting, but have you ever done a retreat that was all boys?
Yes, we did a Thailand retreat. We didn't plan on doing it, but at the last minute, we had two cancellations for the two girls. So we had a smaller group, and we had five boys, and
So
that
did
was
you
a lot of
notice
fun.
any difference in the ability to open up?
Very much so,
Mm,
very
okay.
much so, because you didn't have the peer experience of the female sharing first.
Yeah.
And I I became the mom of the group, which is
Yeah.
normally I'm the facilitator, and sometimes people call me travel mom, and that's okay. And it's sort of in jest, but it was very different dynamic, a very different,
Yeah.
and I kept calling them a boy band at that point. I was like, you guys are
Yeah.
just a boy band. But
Yeah.
it was a very different experience. It was a lot more physical.
Hmm.
It was very different.
Yeah.
I maybe could have done some things differently as well. I don't know. I had never had that experience, but it was the very first time in 12, 13 years that we had an all boy group. Yeah.
Have you ever like in your travels or with your groups or anything seen or know anything about rites of passages for boys, and if in cultures where you've been in where they create those rites of passage for the boys, if you have found that makes a difference?
We have spoken about that. We did a retreat in Greece, and it was pretty even. It was a quite a large trip. We dealt a lot with myth, and we had storytellers come. And so, using the backdrop of myths and, the gods and the demigods and all of that, we did a large. It was almost like I don't want to say interpretive dance, but it was an epic along the life of Heracles,
Hmm.
which was about he had all these feats that he had to do. So we told the story and we asked people to stay blindfolded. And, they did movements, which, it was like 2 hours or so, did us
Wow.
a long time to be blindfolded to, they did movement where they were experiencing what it felt like to go through these feats.
Hmm.
And I had choreographed all of this music. And then, there were points where I'd have them take their blindfolds off and we did a thing together and I'd have them, but it took a while for the men to
Yeah.
have this sense of really feeling comfortable around it. We talk a lot about rites of passage. There are not in the Western world, there are really not any huge, ceremonies
Yeah.
for Westerners. There just aren't. I mean, there are Jews have their
Hmm.
thing, um, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvahs,
Yeah.
and in Latin cultures, there's the quinceanero for the girls, but there's nothing for the
Hmm.
boys.
Yeah.
I just don't really know. And we've spoken about it in many different retreats when we do our circles and things
Yeah.
of that nature. But the closest that we had was this experience in Greece.
I know that there are more opportunities for things like that in Australia at the moment. They're quite kind of a little bit in the forefront of understanding, recognizing some of the challenges that boys face and ways to be able to support boys
Yeah.
better. Um, So I know you do a lot with mental health as well. So if just a normal, average, hardworking, dedicated mom who is wanting to do her best and is struggling during those teen years, what advice could you give, that mom to help her with her son's mental health?
Well, I mean, this is why I wrote a book. The book talks about the stages of development from the perspective, a layman's perspective. I'm not a doctor. However, everything in my book has been, read by PhDs and psychologists and neuroscientists to make sure that it's accurate and correct.
Yeah.
And it's written from the perspective of a layman to help parents understand the physical, biological, neurobiological, and psychological, emotional changes that their children, their teens are going through. That's the first step. The second step, for sure, has got to be, and I talk about this in my book too, and I include a whole chapter of tools. Again, tools to me are super important. They're the scaffolding that
Mhm.
helps us really recognize what our internal world process is. You talked about you work with younger people, your specialty are young, toddlers up to the 3 to 7.
Yeah.
Well, that's when the programming happens, and
Yeah.
you and I each have our own set of programming. And when I work with teens, it's closer to, the program time in biological years. For us, it's a lot farther away,
Yeah.
and it's dipped deeper back in our subconscious. And I use tools with teens to help them uncover and unravel what those subconscious beliefs are that may not be accurate because they were developed in a time where we weren't developmentally able to rationalize what those things meant. For example, if somebody walks in and it's your father and you're a child and you have the experience where they're always slamming the door, you could have a nervous system disruption to loud noises. And you could internalize those experiences to something's wrong with me. You
Mhm.
may not know that the door hinges are over, oiled, and you internalize this stuff as having meaning. Maybe there is a meaning to it, maybe there isn't. But the fact is that information is stored in our subconscious as a signpost to help us really recognize and keep ourselves safe in experiences as we have them. As parents, you asked what advice I would have. I would say use the tools in the book. And I always say that in my book too. Use the tools in my book to uncover what's there. And once you start this self-exploration journey, those are the discoveries. Those are the spaces that you can connect with your teens and invite them to use the tools. And through that vulnerability, connect and say, look, I'm on this journey because I want to be a better parent to you as you're going through your teen years. Here's what I discovered about my own programming. So when you do this thing, I think this, but that may not be your intention. I'm now recognizing that. What do you think about this? What about your programming, and how do you think this made you feel when I said this when you were younger? Do you think maybe your subconscious has information stored that we should uncover and unravel together? Because I really want us to stay connected. Teens need us to stay connected.
So interesting again, like the similarities keep popping up, but the first thing you said was for parents is the awareness, the understanding of what is actually going on. I say the same thing about understanding about unconscious gender bias and what is going on there, because you have to be aware of whatever is going on, and then you have to learn as much as you can about it so that you are confident and competent in what you're attempting to do in your relationships. And then what you said about working on yourself first, I think is a very powerful tool. And again, it's the same, there's similarities. If with a little boy, if you don't recognize and understand where your definition of what it means to be a male is coming from, then without that awareness, you are just going to perpetuate whatever that story was and carry it over. So, in order to, I think that's really an important thing for a parent to hear. You have to do the work yourself first.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you're echoing that.
Mhm.
I talk in my book less about the gender specific stuff and more about some of the myths that we perpetuate through, about adolescence. And one of them is really about childism, or some people call it adultism, but it's the way that we believe that children, regardless of their gender, have no rights to their own autonomy and their own bodies and their own sovereignty and their own thoughts and their own likes and all of this stuff. And I'm sure layered upon that is the gender roles that subconsciously we've inherited from the culture around
Yeah.
us. It's a lot to unpack. There's so many layers of understanding our cultural biases. Yeah, so many.
I do think that one of the biggest components of everything and in every relationship is the way you're able to communicate. So I haven't worked as much with teen boys, older boys, as I have with younger boys, but in the little bit of time in Beirut that I worked in middle school, um, it I draw boys to me, and I think I do because I listen to them and I respect them, and I'm curious about, what's going on in that little head of yours, and let's try and make sense of it and make the best of it. But what hit me the most about the teens, you go into a school, that age group of middle school is actually called the zoo.
Oh, wow.
And it's like so but you have two extremes. So you have people who don't want to touch that age group at all because they're going through some wild things in their development. And then you have other people that just thrive on being in that world because there are so many beautiful, positive things in that um, in that stage that they're going through. And for what I found was for the boys, they were just at the precipice of really, really understanding this gap between them and girls, and their self-esteem would tend to start to take a nosedive down because they would kind of feel, they can't keep up with the academics on the same level. They can't keep up with the communication on the same level. And so then they would act out. They'd get in trouble. Or they'd shut down. They'd get depressed or anxious. And that age group is just such a misunderstood age with such beautiful possibilities to support them. So I think the work that you're doing is really critical work, whether it's girls, boys, anybody. It's really critical work. What I'd like you to tell me is what is your most special or cherished story that's come out of some transformation or realization that's happened in one of your, teen retreats or projects or things like that.
Boy. I mean, I have so many. So I've re created relationships with the people that I mentor, and I connect very well with the boys. I mean, I do have some girl connections as well, don't get me wrong. Um, but again, I'm not their parent. And so there's a little difference between, here's this really open woman who,
Yeah.
will talk about anything, who listens, who truly, truly
Yep.
listens. And I have story after story of long-term relationships. I have one he was a teen boy when we first started working together. He came on our first trip. He had been on 4 trips with us and always had issues connecting with his mom, who was very jealous of his intellect, and that actually sparked a lot of uh, problems in their
Mm.
relationship, which I think now he's 26 and he's finally resolved that, but it was 10 years ago or longer that he came on his first trip with us. And every single milestone, I'm the one who sends a note to, or a text, or a
Yeah.
message to. And that to me is really so special. And I just received from a different teen boy who's now in his 20s, who just, he just got an art direction role on a independent film, and I was the first person he wanted to reach out to. So this is a different person that I worked with just in terms of mental health and tools, where the other person, the first person I was talking about, traveled with us. And I saw him as my other kid,
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw him as yet another kid of mine. I I don't know if I can tell you a transformational story because that's their stories. I could just tell you the connection stories that make what I do make sense to me. And as long as teens and the teens that I work with know that there's somebody there that will
Yeah.
listen to them, that can see them, that can hear them and understand them and not judge or try to fix
Fix
them.
them. Yeah. Yeah.
If they want to, quote unquote, air quotes, fix themselves, I can give them tools and tell them about my journey of fixing myself, but I'm not there to fix them. I'm there to hold space for exactly where they are on this journey right now. And there's no judgment. And that is the most important thing that I can do. And I think if parents can adapt that attitude, a little bit more versus the conventional parenting methods of, well, I'm going to tell you what to do to make this work, sort of thing. That's not what the kids need, especially boys.
Yeah.
Boys tend to be programmed to want to fix it themselves.
I think
I don't
there's
know. Is that a
so,
gender?
yeah, I think that there's so much that we don't understand about what the differences are. Like I grew up in the 60s and
Yeah, me
70s,
too.
and so it was kind of um, like I remember working in a daycare that was classified as being very progressive and modern because we were a co-op for one thing, but because we were very aware about not assigning any stereotypical gender things like, only girls can be in this corner, or this is just for the boys or whatever. We were very, we were cool about, if you want to come in with the barrettes in your hair, that's cool. You want to come in a skirt? I don't care. It was a different time. Like now it's a different, gender has taken a whole different, understanding and complexity actually. But it was it was neutral. And I think that was just part of, historical development. But I think that we need to get to a point where we understand and we respect what those differences are. So there are differences between males and females, and there are challenges and gifts that come with both. But I think that it's the little boys that they don't understand what the differences are, and the people who are raising them and caring for them don't understand. So it creates a world for those little boys where there are not enough people who are really talking to them and really listening to them and really trying to understand and be respectful of those differences and challenges. So
Yeah.
even maybe if your focus isn't specifically boys, you are providing an environment where you have the knowledge and the desire and the passion just to be, helping human beings be better human beings, understand themselves better, and just, you know, enjoy this experience
Yeah, very much.
better. So I think that's quite beautiful. Okay, I'm trying to be very mindful of the time here, and I have two final questions.
Okay.
So the first one is just for fun. What would the title be for a movie about your family life up till this point, and what would be a short summary or synopsis of that movie?
Oh goodness. Um, a different path. Yeah, it would absolutely be about a different path. I often, our journey, I outlined the journey. The journey itself is the physical journey, but it's also the journey into connection.
Mhm.
And often people will say, you need not to be so close to your son. You're ruining him. Like people have said that to me
Yeah.
also. And that to me is a little like, wait a minute, isn't a parent and a child who have a strong connection, isn't that what the purpose of, having a
Yeah.
family? That's all I wanted in, with
Yeah.
my parents, which I didn't have.
Yeah.
Um, but I think those are people's fears and biases speaking up about how making my child more feminine in some way. And
Yes. And it's
really,
not about you, it's about them, and it's about that lack of awareness and knowledge.
and to experience my son, who's a very intellectual, very well-read, well-spoken, worldly, very articulate, and very kind human being. I'm proud to have birthed
Yeah.
this human being, and I'm proud to have this person in the world, even though we don't agree on,
Yep.
60% of the stuff, like politically, we're very different. But we
Yeah.
can speak.
Yeah.
And I see the way that he treats his beautiful girlfriend and with kindness and respect. And, he sort of pulls back the layers of whatever's happening on the surface and is able to ask her, what are you feeling right
Yeah.
now? And what's driving this? And that is because of how I raised him.
Yeah.
So that kind of connection and ability to connect in relationships is a gift that I gave to him, which he's giving to the world, right?
Yeah.
So that would be the summary, really, of the movie. It would be about connection and through childhood and adventures, but then how this looks
Yeah.
in it.
Well, I think you might just have, like, seriously, I think that could be quite an interesting movie or a documentary because I think it's a beautiful message with
Yeah.
connection being at the core of everything. So, yeah, I love that. All right, the last official question. Picture yourself, and your son is going to be starting his family for the first time. So you are going to become a grandmother for the first time. What would you say to your son? What words of wisdom would you share with your son?
Wow. First of all, that's the thing that I want the most.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, I could tell we're the same age and
Mm,
so like I'm ready.
yeah.
He's to me, I'm not. But I think what I'd say to him is, you got this. Look, I don't want to tell him how to raise a child. It's not my place. I know I trust you. You got this. I'm here to
Yeah.
support you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not here to take over. You got this. I have all confidence in the world, knowing who you are as a human being. You got this. But I'll be there behind you to catch and whatever you need, but I'm not taking over. No, this is yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today and for sharing your insights and your stories. And I also know how precious time is. You're a busy woman like everyone else. So I hope that you feel that I've honored your time today. It
You
has
have
been such a pleasure to talk with you, and I'm sure that the listeners will walk away with many different things that just shake their thinking up a little bit about parenting and about connection and about becoming aware and knowledgeable about, parenting can be beautiful and and the support that we can get from each other. For those who want to learn more about Lainie's work, check out her book, Seen, Heard, and Understood, and visit multiple websites that I will have listed in the show notes. And if you do have a teen, do make sure that you look at it because it can be a challenging time for our children as well as ourselves. And the more support that we can give our children during that time, the better their world will be, and therefore our will be also. So, and if you loved today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. Let's continue unlocking the parenting code together, one conversation at a time. Thank you, Lainie.
Thank you.
If you're a parent raising a boy in today's complex world, be sure to explore sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll discover expert guidance and support designed to help you unlock your full parenting potential. As Amelia Gambetti says, this job is too difficult and too beautiful to do alone. Together we can explore this adventure and discover the magic of raising boys.